Next on Garden Line, the Memorial Rose Garden in Rapid City. Eating healthy from the garden.
You know, it's hard to beat garden fresh vegetables.
And which indoor plants are poisonous to pets.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.
Welcome to Garden Line. I'm Stephen Monk. Tonight on our show, we'll visit with an extension expert who will demystify nutrition value and portion sizes of fresh vegetables. Also, the extension veterinarian will share some key information about which houseplants are toxic to the pets. And in our Garden of the Week feature, we will take you back to the Memorial Rose Garden in Rapid City, South Dakota, to see the roses in bloom. As always, our panel of lawn and garden experts will answer your questions, so get ready to call in. Our panelists are here with the most up-to-date information about gardening, lawn care and weed control, and a host of other garden and lawn concerns. Now, joining me in the studio to answer your questions tonight is John Keykafer, Brookings County Extension Educator, Rhoda Burrows, Extension Horticulturalist, Jim Wilson, Extension Pesticide Application Education Coordinator, and Casey Jensen, SDSU Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences Professor. Now, the phone number for you to call in your lawn and garden questions is 1-866-595-SDSU. Again, that is 1-866-595-7378. Helping answer the phones tonight are the Brookings Master Gardeners. And remember, when you're calling in your question, please provide the phone volunteers with as much information as possible about your garden problem. And also be ready to provide a description of the problem, when it first showed up or appeared, is it affecting any other surrounding plants, and perhaps some moisture or and soil conditions that are surrounding that plant that you're noticing the concern with. Now, before we get to our questions, we have some important information for you. The Garden Line went on location with Extension Veterinarian Russ Daly, and we learned which indoor plants are poisonous to pets and what pet owners have in terms of resources to keep both your plants and their pets healthy and happy.
Hi, I'm Russ Daly, Extension Veterinarian at SDSU, and it might surprise you to know that there are over 100 different species of household plants that have been identified as potentially toxic to pets. Now, it's not my intent to go through all of them here on this segment, but I would like to speak in general terms about houseplant-related toxicities in pets and give you some examples of some plants that are problems. In practice, we didn't see very many of these problems, but when we did, they could be potentially very severe indeed. Most of the time, we'll have pets actually eating parts of the plants. And more commonly, we're talking about puppies and kittens who are usually used to eating and chewing and digging in things. More commonly, we'll see these in the colder times of the year when both your pets and your plants spend more time indoors. And it's also important to remember that these plant-related toxicities are dose-dependent, meaning the smaller your animal is, the less of the plant material he or she would have to eat before symptoms would ensue. So I want to stress, too, if at any time you suspect any poisoning in your animal or any sickness in your animal, don't delay to call your veterinarian, because the time is of the essence in treating these issues. I want to give you some examples of some plants that can be problems, and talk a little bit about the symptoms that you would see. Calcium oxalate crystals are a common toxic principle in many of these houseplants, and that's demonstrated by this umbrella tree and this philodendron. If your pet was to eat any of these plants, the immediate reaction will be swelling of the gums and lips and then also excessive drooling. And this could be very stressful to a young pet and could result in some problems with swallowing or breathing. Cardiac glycosides are another toxic principle in plants, and that's demonstrated by this kalanchoe plant. The toxin is in the leaves, and symptoms would ensue within hours of eating the leaves of this plant. We would see depression, rapid breathing, incoordination, and paralysis. Now, a common plant that we'd have around the house during the holiday time is a poinsettia, and my wife has done a very good job of keeping this plant up since Christmas. We don't really know the toxic principle in poinsettias, but we do know that if your pet would ingest some of the milky sap that's present in the poinsettia stems and leaves, then we would have a very sore mouth and we'd have some vomiting problems, and could usually not life-threatening, but could be very stressful anyway. Also, hollies and mistletoes would be some things that we have around the house at holiday time that could be potentially problems for your pets. So these are just a few examples of problems that we could see on houseplants, few of the many examples. So the challenge lies in how do we determine which houseplants are in our homes that are potentially problems. And for that, there's a very useful website out there. It's the website of the Animal Poison Control Center, and they have a list of the toxic houseplants that are known to cause problems. They also have a list of non-toxic houseplants that are safe for pets. So check that website out and be aware of the hazards in your house and keep your animal friends safe. I do want to stress that at any time you have a suspicion of problems in your pet, call your veterinarian. They're your best resource. Also, your extension educator or the veterinary extension group at SDSU can help you out with these questions. Thanks.
Well, we want to thank Russ for that helpful information, because we certainly want to keep some nice harmony between our houseplants and our pets that we have out there. So, and once again, if you do have some questions or a situation would show up, don't be afraid to call your local extension office or local veterinarian for more information. So, but before we get started with your questions that you're calling in tonight, we're going to do our roundtable this evening, and we're going to start out with John. John, what's in the garden line headlines for insects tonight?
Well, we're at a point where a lot of different insects are starting to show up. Brought in a couple examples here of some that we'll start seeing, probably hearing more than seeing in the next week or so. Already heard one about a week ago now. And these are the dog day cicadas. Some people pronounce it cicadas. Some people call them locusts or harvest flies. They're the large insects that sit up in trees and buzz quite a bit. And these get their common name, dog day cicadas, from the time of year that they appear. They're out most commonly in late July and early August, and they make that kind of undulating buzzing sound up in the trees. As far as being a pest or not in a garden, for most people, they're just there. Sometimes the noise drives people a little bit crazy. But really, otherwise, the only damage that they'll do in most lawn settings is in some fruit trees. They can make little slits out on the tips of the twigs where they lay their eggs. Around here, we don't have enough of them to really worry about. Some other places, they start seeing larger numbers, and it gets to be more of an issue. Okay.
Can I ask a related question to the cicada, or cicada, as you mentioned here? And last year, there were a lot of questions on the cicada killer. Is that something, an insect that people need to be aware of or concerned about?
Well, they definitely be aware of it. Now, as far as a concern about it, they're large, they look intimidating. They're really not all that harmful unless you are a cicada. They tend to dig into people's lawns. They make some big holes because they're big wasps, and they throw up a pretty nice mound of soil around those holes. But what they really do is they go out, the females do, and find the cicadas and sting them, and their sting is paralytic to the cicadas. It just renders them immobile. They lay an egg on it, and that developing larva eats that. They haul them underground to let the larva have some protection during that time. As far as effects on humans, like I say, they're big and intimidating, but they're not likely to sting. You'd have to really work at it to make them sting you.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Yep.
Rhoda, in the world of general horticulture, what do we have for tonight?
Well, I brought in some samples of some grapes that we've been seeing. There's a disease of grapes called black rot, and we're beginning to see some problems with this across the state with the wet spring the last couple of years. You'll get in the cluster of grapes, there will be just some small black grapes in among it. You see it here. It's a fungal disease, And you'll also see symptoms on the leaves. They'll have very distinct small leaf spots, brown leaf spots, and if we can get a graphic of that up as well. The fungus will invade both the leaves and the fruit and can recycle through the plant. So it'll send out more spores and keep reinfecting. It starts infecting about 2 weeks after bud break in the spring. And so that's when we need to get our first fungicide on if we're using fungicide to protect against this. Unfortunately, the fungicides that are available to homeowners aren't real effective against this. Probably the most effective one is mancozeb, if you can get one that has that on. However, it has a 65-day pre-harvest interval, so we can use it for about 2 sprays, and then we have to, especially if you have valiant grapes, you're going to have to stop at that point. But the most effective thing a homeowner can do is, when you see those little black grapes, is to take them off the plant. If you leave them on the plant, they're just going to be there to infect next year. So you need to take them away from the plant. Don't leave them on the ground, and that will help cut down on that considerably.
So you remove those now or later on?
As soon as you'd see them, I think it's a good idea.
Okay, so they could still go out and do that now at this point?
They could do that now.
Okay. A little tedious, but hand labor would work the best.
And then at harvest time, make sure you get rid of any grapes that you didn't harvest.
Okay. Thank you, Rhoda. Jim, what do we have on deck for you tonight?
Well, Mike Mechnick was not able to be here, so he asked if I'd come in and try to handle some of the weed questions. And I think what I'm going to suggest may not be what people want to hear, but we're quickly getting into that time of the year when it's just plain too hot to be spraying our broadleaf weeds in the yard. I think we're going to do more harm than damage with the tomatoes and with grapes, particularly grapes. Some of these plants are extremely, extremely sensitive to the products that are used in most of the broadleaf lawn mixes. So keep them mowed, keep them going from seed, keep them from going to seed, and set them up for a good kill this fall. Wait till we get let temperatures cool down, and that'll be the best time to hit them.
Okay. So in the meantime, just keep pulling or mowing?
Pulling or mowing.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. Casey, what do you have for us?
Well, I've got a couple of phone calls this week from people with issues of snakes around their house. And so generally the answer to those questions is the snakes are there for a reason, and usually they're after food, which is usually rodents. And so my suggestion to people always is to clean the litter and the dead vegetative material away from around their foundations or their flower beds. Places that rodents can hide and provide food and cover for them. And usually if you take care of the rodent problem, you take care of the snake problem. Another good thing to do is to go around and check your house very well and look for any cracks or openings in the foundation or along your siding where the rodents can get in and out, or snakes can get in and out, and fill those up. And not only is it good for keeping rodents and snakes out, but it helps your heating and cooling bill as well to take care of those issues.
Okay. Say, one question that we usually get is if a homeowner finds, like under a set of stairs or sidewalk, where the snakes are coming and going, and the question is, how do we get them out of there so we can plug the hole up? Is there anything that you could put in the hole to repel them, to get them out of the hole so then they could plug it up? Or? Well,
I mean, I've heard of several things, and none that I know are drop dead effective. I've heard of mothballs, and in some places they use more lethal types of things. My best suggestion would be to try to maybe do a little bit of excavation to see where they are, and try to fill the problem up from the bottom up and take care of. It's probably a hibernacula in a situation like that where they're going in and spending the winter. That's not real common, but it does happen, and when it does happen, you may have a lot of snakes in a very small area.
Okay. I always suggest, too, if they can find a young boy that's not afraid of snakes, to gather them up and take them away down by the river or something. So, all right. Thank you, panelists. So, Over the July 4th holiday, Garden Line returned to the Memorial Rose Garden in Rapid City, South Dakota to see the roses at their peak bloom. Here are a few snapshots of those fragrant and visually pleasing beauties in South Dakota's only all-American rose selection display garden. And some beautiful shots from the Memorial Park there in Rapid City. So beautiful scenes for the summer. Well, let's get started on our questions tonight, panelists. The first one here for you, Rhoda, comes from Eureka. And their question is water collected from a dehumidifier safe to use on houseplants?
It's probably about the safest thing that you can get because it's essentially distilled water. So yes, I save all my dehumidifier water and use it in my yard or houseplants or even in my iron.
Okay. Being we have you up here at home plate, tulips and iris, can I cut those back to 1 inch of their growth? That's the question, but you might want to explain when and should they cut that back if they do.
With tulips, we want to wait till the stems and leaves have turned yellow and started to wither, and then you can actually just tug them gently, and usually the whole thing will come out, leaving the bulb behind. With iris, we don't want to cut those down. After replanting, we'll sometimes cut them down maybe to 8 inches long or so. But with iris, we want to leave them throughout the summer so that they can send energy back to their bulbs.
Okay. Two different methods for those plants. Right. Can't treat them the same. Okay, John, and this is going to be happening here this time of the year in the summer. They're doing a rehearsal dinner in mid-August for a wedding. They're going to be outside around 7 p.m. What spray do you put down an hour or so for mosquito control, and when and how much ahead of time, I believe is what it says here.
Right. That's going to be kind of a challenge. It's going to depend a lot on that situation, really. For most of those sprays that you'd put into a lawn or a garden type setting for mosquitoes in particular, you're going to want to put it in before an hour ahead of time. They're going to need to be in for a period of time. Those sprays really rely heavily on the mosquitoes coming in contact with them. The mosquitoes are going to rest in that vegetation. That's when they'll come in contact with them. And so for a homeowner doing this, what you're really looking at is getting out there a day or a couple days in advance and starting to put some of that chemical down to try to control those mosquitoes. We've got a number of products on the market. I don't have a strong preference of one over another. I don't know that one is any better than another on that. What we do have to caution people on, though, is that we do sometimes get people who say, well, I should be able to use an ag chemical on this. Why can't I just use that on my lawn? And what I always tell them is read that label first. Make sure that that formulation is labeled for the way you intend to use it. So if you're looking at an ag chemical, don't figure that just because it'll kill mosquitoes that you can use it in those settings. You want to make sure that it's legal for that use.
Okay. And I would imagine that'd be somewhat of a short-term relief, if any.
Right.
And as soon as down the road their friends and relatives will move in where others vacated.
That's exactly right. It works for a few days. Sometimes it rains sooner than that. It doesn't even work that long. The amount of relief that you get from those mosquitoes really depends on a lot of different conditions. And from what I've seen, sometimes if you just have a nice breeze that day, you might get better control of them than if you've gone ahead and applied a lot of chemical for them.
Okay, thanks, John. Rhoda, daylilies. Well, actually, this is a two-part question here. First one is about daylilies. Should daylilies be deadheaded? And the second part is it too late in the season to continue or be able to use rhubarb? So let's start with the daylilies and deadheading.
Daylilies, yeah, you can deadhead them if you want. Some of them actually deadhead themselves, but depending on the variety and also depending on the variety, how long they'll keep blooming. But it certainly doesn't hurt to cut off those old flower heads. The rhubarb. We're getting pretty close to time to quit harvesting. You can kind of gauge by how thick the stalks are and how fast they're growing, but as we start to hit the heat of summer and the dog days of summer, I'd probably quit about now. And remember, you want to leave that the first year after planting and let it build up before you start harvesting too, for those of you who've just planted.
And the main reason for that is the quality of the rhubarb, or for the health of the plant being able to store energy for next year?
A little bit of both, actually, but certainly it needs time to rebuild that root. And as long as you keep harvesting, it tries to send out new leaves, and it takes a lot of energy to build a new leaf. So.
Okay, good, thank you. Cucumbers, squash, zucchini have blossoms but no fruit. Want to know if they should self-pollinate these. Heard of people using Q-tips as a method to help do that for a second set of blooms or blossoms. Has only one cucumber so far in their plants. Any thoughts on that, Rhoda, or maybe John, on pollinating insects? They don't say if they sprayed or anything, if that would have affected any of their pollinating insects. So
if the squash, it's still a little bit early. And often the first blossoms we see with squash are actually male blossoms, and it takes a little longer for the female to come. So it may be that they just need to wait a few more days or a week or so. Make sure that you have both male blossoms and female blossoms, and you tell the difference because the female at the base of it has a little miniature fruit. So then once you have one of each, then you start to look at is there a pollinating insect. And squash blossoms can be pollinated. They're only good for one day, and in fact they need something like 8 to 15 visits by an insect, usually in the morning. So they've got about 4 hours to have insects visit 8 to 15 times to get a good fruit, which is kind of amazing. We get anything, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. We do have plenty of the pollinators out at this time of year, so I would say at this point, unless they have sprayed and possibly killed some of those off, I'd say you have a pretty good chance of getting them there.
You want to avoid 7 because that will destroy our bees that pollinate.
Okay, John, we got one for you here. I have squash bugs in my garden and they're busy laying eggs. I removed the eggs and killed the bugs I found, but I hear that they can be pests. I hear they can be a pest to eradicate. Must be a hard pest to eradicate here, is what they're trying to say. This is my 3rd year growing squash and pumpkins, but my 2nd dealing with these bugs. Obviously, they overwinter because I saw my first bugs shortly after I transplanted them in June. Any suggestions on non-chemical, organic, quotation, control for this year or future years?
Yeah, well, there are a few options out like that, and I think they're on the right track here, the way they're going about it, to start out with anyway. You start picking them off every time you find them, crushing those eggs anytime you find those egg masses out there, and just keep at that. It is a struggle on those, but if you don't have all that many plants, sometimes you can stay ahead of them and just keep ahead of them that way. The big ones that I tend to talk about a lot, I'm afraid people sometimes get sick of it almost, rotation is huge on these things. Squash bugs can move over relatively long distances, but typically where you see the biggest problems is where people have had members of that cucurbit family for several years in a row. They tend to overwinter well right there. You don't get maybe enough tillage in the spring or in the fall to really till them under, work them to the surface in the spring and let things eat them, just really disrupt their life cycle. And so then they'll start to build up to those big numbers. Other things that we do see people doing, some people will use a clay coating on some of the leaves to try to keep those squash bugs off, or try to put cups around the plants early on to try to keep the squash bugs off. Those things have some effectiveness. I think really the hand picking for a limited number of plants is going to give you greater results than trying some of the other methods out there.
Okay. Here's one from Vermilion. We have some tomato plants that have curled, gnarly leaves on top of the plant. I cannot remember ever having this kind of a problem before. We live in Vermilion. We raise tomatoes and other vegetables for sale. Last year we really got hit with blight. The tomatoes are on the lower part of the garden, which is heavier soil and tends to be wetter than the rest of the garden. The plants are green, but the top leaves are curled up, and now it appears is going to affect the whole plant. It seems to be in just this part or area of the garden, the lower, heavier soil type location, the way it sounds here. So they really don't indicate if they're watering overhead or anything. And so Rhoda, or maybe even Jim, if you want to add.
Everybody's looking at me, Steve. So I think curled, gnarled leaves is really fairly typical of the growth regulator herbicides that we find in the broadleaf weed mixes that we spray our dandelions and those types of things with. Without seeing the sample, it's really hard to tell. But it does sound consistent with what we would expect with some sort of drift from broadleaf herbicide. This always gets to be a little difficult. If it just tinges the top, it likely could grow out of it. The question then, are the tomatoes, are the fruits safe to eat? Since 2,4-D and the other lawn products are not registered for use on tomatoes, we really have no way of saying, yes, it's safe to eat. If the plant grows back, grows healthily, you know, that's kind of a choice you have to make, but we cannot recommend that it be eaten if, in fact, it was herbicide injury.
We sometimes get the question, well, what if I cut off the affected foliage? With these growth regulators, they move through the plant, so that's not going to help you anyway. There is a virus that can look a little bit like that as well. And so I would suggest you take it into your county office and have them look at it or send it on to us, particularly since you're a commercial grower, to be able to get a little bit more definitive answer. But certainly that is typical symptoms for herbicide damage.
Is there any chance it's just moisture related? They said it's on the lower end of the field.
If it's a tight curl, especially if it, I always tell our master gardeners, if it feels rubbery to the touch, that's almost a dead giveaway for herbicide damage. So see if it feels rubbery to the touch.
Rubbery and kind of lacy edged, ruffled edges sometimes. That shows up too. And I don't know, the lower part of the garden, it certainly could be heavier and wetter, but that may be a little bit where the air, maybe an inversion perhaps, could have carried some of that as well. But.
So the moral of the story is, you know, given the situation, take it in. Let's see if we can take a closer look at it and make sure, because with a situation like that, we've got a lot at risk.
Okay, Rhoda, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but from Beersford, should I cut back, trim my Japanese iris just as I do my hybrid iris?
I don't know how they're trimming their hybrid iris. So you can certainly remove the old flowering stalks, but other than that, I would pretty much leave it alone.
Okay. Is now a good time to split or transplant the iris? If not, when should they do that?
Now should be getting into that period of post-bloom when it's basically semi-dormant, so that would be an okay time.
Okay. I have a 2-year-old Japanese lilac tree that had about 20% of its leaves turn black on the edges this spring. Now the black is turning to brown and curling up the leaf. Any idea what may be causing this or how I can prevent that? Brookings is where that call comes from.
There has been reports of quite a bit of bacterial blight on lilac this year, and I suspect that's probably what the issue is. If it's continuing to move down the stem to other leaves, what you need to do is treat it about like fire blight, in that you need to trim out the affected portions and use the Clorox or some other disinfectant. So if you want to double check, bring in a sample to the disease lab and have them take a look and verify that that's the case. But otherwise, trim out the affected portions.
Okay. Anybody been to Eureka lately? All right. Well, this one says they live in Eureka and are wondering what is happening here to all the mountain ash trees. There are several in town, but most have died. Ours is hanging on, but looks quite stressed, dead branches and skimpy foliage. Last year it had little foliage, but a superabundance of fruit.
Well, to me, the superabundance of fruit almost sounds like a climatic or an environmental stress. A lot of times plants or trees tend to do that. They set seed well before they're on their way out, but I'm not sure what kind of environmental stresses they might be experiencing up there.
Mountain ash isn't real well adapted for Eureka, and you may have a combination maybe of some winter stress, maybe brought on by the years of drought previous to that, and sometimes that kind of sets the plant up for general stress. Also, the soils tend to be a little high pH for mountain ash too, and all those things together might be sort of stressing the trees.
Do you think fire blight could be entering in here at all, or?
It could be, although usually we see that a little bit more spotty, and since they're not describing that kind of symptom, although maybe they just haven't described it, but if you do see blackening of stems, and particularly a shepherd's crook sort of end to the tip, that mountain ash are susceptible to fire blight, so that's another possibility of things that might be an issue.
Could be a number of things with that one causing those symptoms. Okay. Well, up next, we're going to join registered dietitian, licensed nutritionist, and Extension Family Consumer Science educator Becky Jensen in a Madison, South Dakota garden. Becky visits with the Garden Line about nutritional value found in the fresh garden harvest and what would be the recommended portion size.
Hi, my name is Becky Jensen. I'm a registered dietitian and SDSU extension educator. And I'm happy to be here today in Daniel Potter's gorgeous garden plot here in Madison, South Dakota. And in fact, I'm really excited because they have offered to provide me with some fresh green beans to eat, which are some of my favorite. You know, it's hard to beat garden fresh vegetables. They're one of the best tasting things out there, and they're very nutritious. You know, canned and frozen vegetables are nutritious too, although with garden vegetables you don't have to worry about the extra sodium that might be added during processing or additional sugars and things. Now, fruits and vegetables really should be a part of our daily diet. In fact, the 2005 dietary guidelines recommend that we consume a range of 5 to 13 servings. For most individuals, that's about 9 servings a day. Now, a serving size is only half of a cup, which looks about like this. So it's definitely doable, and I can guarantee when I eat my fresh green beans, I'm eating a lot more than this. So it's very doable. So include fruits and vegetables for your breakfast, your snacks, your lunch, and your supper, and you can get the recommended amounts. Now, it's also important to color your plate with a variety of fruits and vegetables, all the different colors, because fruits and vegetables are not all created equally. In other words, there's different vitamins, minerals, even fiber content, and also different types of phytochemicals in vegetables and fruits. Now, phytochemicals are substances that can help prevent certain diseases, and again, there's different kinds. I have here an example of the different colors of some of the vegetables that you can color your plate with. We can start with some of the red vegetables. So obviously, we have an example with a tomato. And tomatoes are also high in lycopene, which is important for prostate health. Other types of red fruits and vegetables would be radishes, for fruits would be watermelon. And then we have the yellow vegetables, and these are well known for their vitamin A content, as well as having lots of other phytochemicals. And some we don't really think about all the time would be the onions, mushrooms, and cauliflower, which are the white vegetables. And we also have eggplant, which would be considered a blue or purple type of vegetable. And of course, some other types of blue or purple fruits or vegetables would be your berries, would be an example. And then of course we have the green vegetables, and these are some of my favorites. We've got green peas, green beans, and so having a garden and all of this wonderful garden produce really makes it easy for us to color our plate with lots of different variety. Bottom line is, get a lot of different variety. If you'd like more information on the health benefits of fruits and vegetables and tips on how you can include those in your day,
visit www.fruitsandveggiesmorematters.gov.
Well, we certainly want to thank Becky for that information on the healthiness of the vegetables that are in the garden, and also the size and proportions that we should be consuming of those vegetables. So, do you all meet those requirements every day? All your
Absolutely.
Good, good. That's why you're so energetic and ready to go. So, okay. Rhoda, we're going to go right back to you here. Garlic. This is in Salem. Garlic has gone to seed. Seed pods are ripe. Is it okay to plant the seeds, or should we use the cloves for planting?
I'm a person who hedges my bets, so I would do both. It will take longer from the seed to get a new garlic bulb again. So if they're impatient, they might want to do the cloves, but they can try the seed too.
Okay. Is there anything particular they should do with the seeds? Just open it up and let them dry in some newspaper or something, or?
Probably wouldn't hurt.
Okay. Go that route. All right. Now, we had a number of questions that came in with some images since our last show, for tonight's show. And a lot of these are going to be images, and we're going to look at the images and see what we have as far as what we think may be able to answer the question as far as what we're seeing here. The first one is plum trees, and image 1. It shows some leaves that have some brown spots on it. And they were wondering if we could identify what that may be and what might be causing that. So, and if anything, I guess one thing I would encourage that as you send these types of questions into Gardenline, perhaps leave a little more or give us a little more background and information and questions related to these images. So, is our image? I don't see our image up yet, but okay, there we go. There. Does that look familiar at all as far as what it may be?
Looks like a little bit of combination of things, maybe even some hail damage, but or wind damage, maybe some insect feeding, might be a little bit of bacterial or fungal, but I don't see enough there that would prompt me to say, oh, I got to go out and treat this.
Okay. The next one is a picture of a hosta. Image 2 is what we're going to be looking at. And on this particular plant, it was planted in late May, is when they bought the plant and planted that.
And where is this from again?
This is from Webster.
Oh, okay. This to me looks a little bit maybe like a bacterial spot. And I'm thinking with our cool, wet weather that there might have been a little bit of damage. I guess if this were my hosta, I would simply remove that leaf and assume that probably the rest of the leaves are going to be healthy.
Okay. Now they do indicate, and all these images are from the same location, that they've sprayed them with some 4 insects and disease sprays, but they don't say what they've used for sure. If that may affect some of the diseases, if it actually covers some of those.
If that was a bacterial spot, most of our disease sprays are actually fungicides and don't have as much action against bacteria. So you know, something like chlorthalonil is not going to do anything for bacterial disease anyway. But
okay.
Sanitation.
Removal of that leaf or so. Okay. Image 3, that is a marigold that they started indoors and then transplanted out into the pots.
This to me looks just like transplant shock, that you're seeing some dieback on the edges, that the roots weren't quite developed enough to get the water out, and maybe some strong sunshine or something that drew the water out of the leaves. So this one doesn't concern me too much. I think this will probably grow out of it pretty rapidly.
More environmental stress or change on that plant. Okay. Image 4, these are zinnias that they planted in the garden, and they planted these from seed.
Well, there again, it's a little difficult to tell from the picture, but you can see a little bit of cupping of those leaves and a little bit of twisting and gnarling. It's not conclusive, but it potentially that we could be seeing some herbicide injury there. If they perhaps went out and sprayed a few dandelions, or their neighbors may have sprayed, potentially that could be what we're seeing here.
All right. And the last image we have is an ash tree. And the symptoms, they don't really explain what the symptoms are, but they just say it has been this way for 5 years. And I'm not sure if we can see too much more there. The image, or the picture that we actually have here in at the desk, shows perhaps maybe the location might be affecting the tree itself. If it is thinning, to where it's close to a driveway and by a car. I don't know if that may be affecting the root system in that particular side of the tree. That may be limiting the growth of the tree itself. So I don't know if we can hold that up to the camera, if that would help.
Just looks like some general stress, and for 5 years, I don't know if they watered their lawn during the drought, but that might have done a little bit of injury too. The other thing that we sometimes can see with trees like this, if they were planted too deep and start having roots in circle, or if they've used something on their lawn, that an herbicide of some sort that got some of the roots a little bit and maybe stressing the tree some. So there's a number of things that can do that.
Okay. So once again, if you send those in, that's great to receive those, but if you can just provide a little more information, and that would certainly help the panelists out, I think, in answering some of those questions. The next question would be image 6. My friend and I were recently at the garden tour in Rapid City. My friend spotted this plant in one of the neighboring yards, and asked several of the master gardeners what it was. The orange flower with the yellow center. No one was able to identify it. Rhoda, does that look familiar to you, or?
Well, I asked a couple of our people on campus that work with perennials quite a bit, Dave Graper with McCrory Gardens and Kim James, and both of them said, well, it's some sort of geum, G-E-U-M. And we're not sure on the species. We haven't seen this particular variety, but GM is the genus that you would look for. Sometimes also called common name Avens, which to me is as difficult to remember as GM. So.
Okay. Thank you. Shrub rose, and this comes to us from Watertown. The shrub rose never has bloomed. It is fertilized with Epsom salt in Miracle-Gro for roses. Some others are 18 rose plants in the row in the garden. There's a variety of roses. Some others are shrub also. This one has never bloomed. Any reason or any particular thoughts on why it may not have bloomed, but some of the others have?
What
Watertown,
was
shrub
this
rose? Yep, shrub rose.
And how long? How old?
You know, they don't say that in the question or information here, just how old it is. So. It just seems like the only one that's not blooming, and they're wondering if you might have some ideas on why that may be.
And we presume it's not the only one that's being shaded by something, which is also a possibility.
Could be.
If you get too much fertilizer on, or if there was a little pocket of organic matter or something right under that rose, decreased blooms. I don't know that it would decrease them totally. The only other thing that I can think of is that it's a rose that's a little bit marginally hardy, and some of the blossoms are being winter killed. But
yeah, they mentioned Epsom salts. Is that a common additive for shrub roses? I think in the Watertown area, I wouldn't know that would be needed.
Epsom salts we don't recommend. We don't need the magnesium in our soils. Usually we have plenty sufficient. You often see those recommendations from gardeners further east, and it can be effective for gardeners further east, but for us, we've done side-by-side comparisons, and if anything, we raise our pH, which we really don't need to do. So.
Okay. This comes from Flandreau, Casey. Small animal is creating mounds of fine dirt. The mounds are approximately 8 inches tall, 1 to 3 inches across, and the hole is 1.5 inches in diameter. Any idea what it may be or what they could do about it?
Huh. I would. My guess is they've got some kind of rodent in their yard that's digging a burrow. Trap. I don't know what else there are. There are some licensed rodenticides that you can put out that you can bait them with, and Jim might know.
Yeah. Again, depending upon what it is, we really need to identify what we're dealing with first. If it is something like a ground squirrel, but that hole size might be a little small for that.
Right.
There may be some, but boy, in a lawn situation, if we can find another method of controlling them and not having to use the rodenticides, I think that would be preferable. Trapping is one of the best methods. I know that we can certainly could provide some information. There's some excellent resource on the internet. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Internet wildlife damage.
Yes.
Something.
Yeah. If you Google wildlife damage or lawn wildlife damage, it will come up.
Excellent resource.
Right. And another option that I always try now and then is just to drown them out. Just take a bucket of water or a hose and fill the hole up and keep doing it, and eventually either drown or they come up and you can identify what's there.
And if it's close to the basement and the hole never seems to get full, they might want to run down the basement and knock that out.
Well, and as you mentioned that, there are some individuals who have used, is a green fumigant that is used, it also has a label for some rodents. And that has been used close to houses. The gas permeates the walls, and we've actually had some deaths involved with that. So again, when we're talking that close in the yard, boy, I would really suggest against any of those types of treatments.
All right. Okay. John Belfouche. They live on a small acreage and have thousands of grasshoppers. What can we do to help control them?
Yeah, that's always kind of a fun challenge, especially if you're living in a small acreage in the middle of ag land. And the reason for that is that grasshoppers are like earwigs. We've talked about earwigs for a couple weeks now. You get rid of the ones there and your neighbors all move in. So what you're going to want to look at doing is probably putting down an insecticide on that and plan on repeating it, maybe on a weekly basis for a while, to try to control some of those numbers right in the yard or in that garden. Beyond that, at this point, it's a little bit late to do much of anything for this year.
All right. Well, we're going to go back to a couple other questions that came in last week. And this one is image number 11. And there's a couple pictures. The first is a dahlia leaf on a potted plant. The bottom leaves are yellowing. I do not see any bugs on the upper or lower leaves. I do not see any problem on any of the other dahlias that are planted or that are in the ground, or potted or in the ground. Any suggestions what that might be?
Since this is on the lower leaves, my first inclination is that there may be a root problem. If one of the drainage holes was plugged a little bit or something, when we see yellowing lower leaves on containerized plants, one of the first things that we think of is a water problem, either too much or too little. And if this were mine, I would probably go ahead and take it out of the container, check the root systems, and maybe repot it. The other thing that can cause yellowing lower leaves, of course, is a lack of nitrogen. If they've been fertilizing it the same as the other plants, it's probably not the issue, but that's another thing that can cause us yellowing in the lower leaves.
Okay, a little high moisture condition perhaps. The second picture here, image 12, Jim, maybe you can help us out here. The second is a weed that is coming up in my flower garden, mostly near the bird feeders. I feed black sunflowers in Niger seed only. This weed is impossible to pull, and when I pull it, a milky substance oozes out. I'd like to know what this weed is, and if you have some suggestions on how to get rid of it.
Well, when we're dealing with, with a seedling like this, sometimes it's a little bit difficult. In fact, I visited with a couple individuals about this. When I first looked at it, I saw the one leaf, said, boy, that looks a little like a dandelion, not to insult anybody. But I wonder if we possibly are dealing with a sow thistle, either an annual or perennial. Typically, they aren't that, at least the annuals typically aren't that difficult to pull out, but it does not appear to me to be the Niger thistle. It certainly is not a sunflower. So I think we've got another seed in there, again, potentially a sow thistle. As far as control, boy, I tell you, I would just get a short spade and dig down and get as much as you can, pull it out, and I would expect that probably would take care of it.
Mm-hmm. You think a bird would bring that in?
Very possibly. They could have picked the seed up elsewhere, come to the feeder and dropped it.
Okay, or it could have even been in the seed itself, I suppose, if they didn't clean the seed. For a lot of times, I'm not sure how much they clean some bird seed.
Well, I think the birds are going out, and particularly the goldfinches love thistle seed.
Okay.
And so they're not only eating what we feed them, but what's out there in the wild. And if there's sow thistles or bull thistles out there, they're taking that seed.
Okay. Rhoda, asparagus. Wondering what time of the year is the best time to transplant asparagus and how to plant it. And is there an extension publication that could help them with that?
There is, and I'm trying to remember the exact title of it, asparagus anyway. If you call your county extension people, they can help you find it, or look on our website. If you have trouble finding it, let us know. But when we're talking about transplanting, usually we start asparagus from new crowns because they can get fungus crown rot over time, and so we generally recommend starting from new crowns. And because we're planting from crowns, we usually plant those in the spring when they're dormant. You can actually transplant asparagus, start them from seed, just like other transplants, and you can actually transplant those in the fall if you want, as well as the spring. So that's kind of a broad answer for a question.
But there is a publication available, and probably little seedlings started from seeds would be the best route to go, than the transplant an existing mature plant.
If you start digging up a mature plant, you'll find out the asparagus roots can go down 8 feet, and they can get literally a couple feet across. So you end up either disturbing the plant so much that you might as well start over with a new one, or end up with a lot of work.
Okay. And then also they want to make sure when they do transplant those that they get them down into the ground, not right at the surface. So.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for this evening. And just to let you know, Gardenline does repeat twice each week on South Dakota Public Broadcasting Digital Channel number 3, which is also known as the Create Channel. The encore broadcast can be seen Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central and Saturdays at 4 p.m. Central. Check your local listings to find SDPB Digital Channel 3 where you live. Now, time to wrap up. Thanks to our panel of experts, John Keykafer, Brookings County Extension Educator, Rhoda Burrows, Extension Horticulturalist, Jim Wilson, Extension Pesticide Application Educator Coordinator, and Casey Jensen, SDSU Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences Professor. Thanks to our phone volunteers, the volunteers from the Master Gardeners from Brookings, and thanks to all of you for watching and calling in. Have a good evening.
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.